Apologies for the delay. Be there in a sec. Okay, we will get started. Thanks everyone for joining us. Hi, to introduce myself, Louise Mamuni. I am the co-chair of on the lands of Aboriginal people today, and acknowledge that land has not been ceded and is still occupied by people other than the original inhabitants. And I also would like to acknowledge any Aboriginal people here today and their elders, past and present, and acknowledge the role of Aboriginal people economically, socially and environmentally to our world. We have with us today, and this is now our, I think, 6th year of the Policy Community of Practice webinar series. We have with us a special guest. Mr Nick Rowley joins us from his roles in an ANU, I think, a professor. Nick, you can probably correct me if I'm wrong. And he is also chair of the Net Zero Commission too, but he's really here to talk about policy as we know it, and get us thinking about what is this thing called policy, how can we influence it, what role do we have, and what is the future direction of the New South Wales Public Service in contributing to policy. So Nick, I think we have definitely enough people to be able to start, and I can see you there. Great. And we will be sharing your slides shortly as well. So you can, thank you. We're ready for the slides, so they'll be coming through. Great.
Do you want to just put them as a slideshow without them having the sidebar in them? Just make them big, please.
Yeah, it's showing on our end, but not on everyone else's. So I think we will we'll try resharing.
Lovely. Hey, thank you very much, Louisa. Thanks for that very short introduction. Yes, indeed, I am, for my sins, an Associate Honorary Professor at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University. I would say this, but I think it is, possibly with a bit of competition from the University of Melbourne, the best public policy school in this country. And thank you very much for your articulate acknowledgement to country. I'd underline that. Before I start, I also want to acknowledge some of the faces that I've just skipped through on what is 8 pages of little faces. Tom Zwar is not a senior public servant in any way. I've not seen Tom in more than 5 years. He's the son of a dear friend of mine. His sister is working in Berlin on climate policy at a public policy school called the Hertie School. And when his sister was a very young babysitter to my kids, I lent her a few books on climate change and maybe that made a bit of a difference in terms of some of her life and career choices. But Tom, good on you for working where you do. And I look forward to catching up soon. And also, I just want to say hello to Alberta and Isha and Linda, all of whom work as part of the team at the Net Zero Commission. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time to be here. These are the climate stripes. They were put together by Ed Hawkins. I think they're quite beautiful. The executive director of the Net Zero Commission has a tie with the climate stripes on it. I won't go into the detail of really what this represents, other than to say that we have a trend, we don't have a fashion. Atmospheric warming of the atmosphere is clearly intense. I fear it's becoming more intense. And I know we've got a very broad group of public servants here, but no matter what you do in terms of policy, in terms of your work in planning or treasury or cabinet office or transport or anywhere else, none of that is any easier here in New South Wales if we have a more than 2 to 3 degree warming scenario this century. It's the great accelerator in relation to risk. Next slide. Just a little bit about me, I'll be very quick. On the left, that's me having my hand shaken, saying goodbye after 9 years of working at the centre of the New South Wales government as an advisor to Premier Bob Carr. When I left, Bob said that I worked on his federal agenda and his personal passions. And during that period, I was involved in a few things, not all of them grand successes, some of them moderate successes and some of them failures, but I think I learned a lot from all of them. And I was very fortunate to work with a premier of the ability, and I've not worked with anybody who worked harder ever in my career than Premier Carr. But during that period, I was involved in helping draft the Sydney Harbour Foreshore Statement. I can go to places around the harbour and I can step back and go, I know that the then Minister for Planning said that this would be developed as housing. It's not housing, it's something different, and it's enjoyed by people, and it's enjoyed by welcome swallows, and it's enjoyed by other small beings. I was also involved in a number of other things, some of which endure, some of them which do not. One of them is the Building Sustainability Index, which at the time I think was a very innovative tool for both measuring and linking measurement into regulation of how it is we build new housing here in New South Wales. That wasn't just Nick Rowley shaking the hand of the Premier, that was a whole team of really, really capable public servants working together to try and get a cabinet minute through. After I left, it's really nice when these are both leaving photographs, by the way. So they were probably really happy that I was going, or that I'm not sure. Anyway, they said that I'd done whatever I'd done, but that was me saying goodbye to Bob Carr. I was then fortunate to work at the centre of government at Downing Street for 2 years when I was advising the person on the right, Tony Blair. The woman in the middle is my wife, Tanya, who at the time was 37 weeks pregnant with my third daughter, who's now a 20-year-old at the University of Sydney. But that was Tony Blair taking half an hour and more in his diary between a cabinet meeting and a meeting with 3 of his EU counterparts, wanting just to sit down and reflect and talk about what we had failed to do and what we had done, and really just to acknowledge the contribution that I'd made. And it was extraordinarily generous, and it was important. He said that your wife comes along as well, because he knew I had a young and at the time growing family. So those are the 2 goodbyes. In the middle, one of the things I'm very proud of having initiated, deeply relevant to my current role, is really one of 2 people who helped initiate the Stern Review into the economics of climate change. Nick Stern is someone who I'm still hold in the very highest regard. What he thinks of me, I don't know, but I know what he wrote at the front of the review, which was to Nick, with many thanks for guidance from A to Z from Nick, which was a very generous thing for him to say. So yeah, well, I've worked close to political and policy decision making, but I've also developed the 2 Masters of Public Policy at the University of Sydney, which I taught for 2.5 years. It's really nice when I bump into people in the corridors in for Parramatta Square or somewhere else, and they go, "Hey Nick, hi, what are you doing?" And they're former students of mine who've decided that they too want to pursue a career in public service. But also I most recently worked at the School of Public Policy at the London School of Economics, and there I developed a course on effective climate policy and also policy making power and politics. So I sort of have bridged academia, practice, and I think one of the things that has possibly aided me a great deal in all of those roles is that I actually started as a grade 9-10 public servant working here in New South Wales, with my first job being out in Blacktown and my second job working with the Office on Ageing here in central Sydney. And I still catch up with my first boss, a really wonderful public servant called Gillian McPhee, who used to wear the most colourful clothes, and she still does. And I learnt a lot from her. Next slide. How I want and how I've thought about this session is I can go blah, blah, blah and share lots and lots of PowerPoint slides. I'm only sharing 8. I want to be provocative. Hopefully I want to be clear. Some of what I say you'll listen to and go, that's completely irrelevant to the context in which I work. Some of the things you hear, you might say, oh, that's deeply relevant to the context in which I work. And I'd like to ask a question, right? So challenge. Please challenge what you hear. That's how I've structured it. Will be done hopefully in the next 10 minutes or so, and I will keep quiet. And please, Louisa, you help monitor the input from people who are working in here in New South Wales and part of this group of people with enough interest in policy and practice to spend an hour on a Wednesday listening to me rabbiting on. So please challenge, and I'm with Karl Popper in that it is the only way. It's the only excuse for a lecture is to challenge. The questioning and the challenging is the best bit. That's where we get to the heart of it. Next slide. I use and have used this in my teaching in relation to public policy. This is a street that some of you may recognise. I hope that some of you on this call actually maybe don't recognise it, and you spend your time working out with the Department of Agriculture in Orange, or that you're working in Goulburn, or you're working in a regional centre. But for those who pass through the CBD of Sydney, this is probably a reasonably familiar scene. There doesn't seem to be very much going on as the grey Mercedes doesn't go in the bus lane and goes through an enormous puddle of water next to a rubbish bin with a woman with a backpack going past the St James Hotel VIP lounge, and next to the Kanga convenience store opposite David Jones, which of course is just transmogrifying into something different. It's going to be housing. And as we look back, we see a bus lane on the street, and we see a bus, and we see a bench, and we see a rubbish bin. Working on public policy, we surely can address major societal challenges and problems. We can understand and work within a political context and a liberal democracy where people get voted in to address some of those challenges as well as they can as the executive, and then deliver in addressing those challenges that you may read about in the Sydney Morning Herald or scroll through on your phone or listen to on the radio or in the podcasts that you favour. But one of the things that I think is a really important thing to recognise is that a vast amount of what it is we do as public policy professionals is ubiquitous. It is day in, day out, supporting the very amenity that we enjoy simply through walking down a street, breathing air that which is partly made up of components that are regulated by the EPA. Putting our rubbish in a rubbish bin, which is sitting there on a street which has a certain form of stone on it, and where does that waste go? Is some of it recycled, or does some of it end up at Woodlawn or Ardlethan in terms of some of the major waste facilities in the Sydney Basin? When I first arrived in Sydney, the pedestrian amenity on this street was very different in the lead up to the Sydney Olympics. There was a lot of work in central Sydney to use greystone as the very element of the footpath the woman is walking along. What happens to the water when it rains like this or in a more severe way? There are people working in the City of Sydney and in the Department of Transport knowing what the camber of the street needs to be in order to take the water from where it is to where it needs to go to ensure some measure of safety. Can a bus go in that lane or not? Can that Mercedes be imported with an imposition of what form of tariff or tax? The bus doesn't just appear in that lane because of magic. To me, I see this and I see this scene. And I hope you think I'm a little bit more interesting than this and I can talk about cinema and sports and whatever else. But I look at this image and I see public policy. I see citizens supported by decisions and activities by other people. And many of those people are public policy professionals. Aristotle called politics the master science. Albert Einstein called politics harder than physics. There's a wonderful academic who's now at Cambridge University who actually spent a lot of he's originally a Tasmanian and spent time working in the Tasmanian government. He's a fellow called Dennis Grube. And he's written a very, very good book, I think, on why governments fail and how they might succeed. And in correspondence with Dennis Grube, we were ruminating on if Aristotle came back, he may well say it's not politics, because politics has now become so performative, so crude, so fast, that it is actually possibly the master science could be public policy. Because without the policy linked to the politics, all the politics is performance, press releases, and cabaret. And of course, there's a lot of that as we observe the rise of populism here and in other places around the world. But it is the link between the performance and then getting the traction in relation to the policy. And that policy is not only the new things, it is proposition, it is delivery, and a very, very important element of policy. And anybody working in the Department of Health knows this, as do others who work in other departments, I'm sure, is, I think, the often forgotten element of effective policy, which is simply maintenance. We are lucky to walk down streets like this. And one of the things that makes streets like this work are effective policy professionals. Next slide. I won't labour this, but what policy is, some of it is seen. It is above the waterline. And the Sydney Morning Herald may only notice when it is writing stories about the shenanigans, I won't use a more technical academic term than shenanigans, going on at Parramatta City Council. And people observe that and they think, oh God, oh, gee work as a work it. Oh God, he's just backs up every single prejudice that people may have. The news doesn't tend to focus on the positive and the ubiquitous and the support that public servants and public policy provides on a daily basis. So often not visible, I think one way to think about these things is using the iceberg metaphor, is the role of public service professionals is considering, developing, implementing policy and maintaining public value. And that is critical. And yes, we can think about that as we read the news, as we are distressed by what we read about maladministration or corruption or laziness or whatever else. But I think as we sit, as we may later this afternoon or go from where you are today to where you need to be tonight to sleep and eat and be with your friends and your family, that we are surrounded by the benefits of living in an open liberal democracy where we have a rich public service who are helping create public value. Next slide. I could talk about this for a very long time, but I'm going to be very, very quick, and I don't think I'm going to do justice to what I think is a brilliant and slightly dated, possibly book, but only dated in relation to the year that it was written. Whenever we think about public policy, people talk about tools, they talk about mechanisms, they use what I would describe as jargon and pseudo-technical language. We've got to be careful about how we communicate, all of us. I think this is a very, very useful book. And it's a seminal book for anybody wanting to understand public policy. From Christopher Hood, who sadly passed away last year. He spent a bit of his career working actually in the Department of Government at the University of Sydney. But in his book, The Tools of Government, he basically goes down to 4 elements of what policy is. It may be other things, but when we think about our role as policy professionals, it's good to structure kind of, well, if we're going to be policy professionals and we want to be initiating, advising, analysing, delivering, maintaining, what are these tools of public policy? I may not be doing this justice, and I'm going to do something which is probably best avoided, but try and read a slide. But one is nodality. Government does hold really important information on societal challenges and problems. There's a greater openness in relation to the availability of that data, of course, now, and that I think is generally a very good thing. But we do hold information which is critical to understanding what interventions and what decisions are going to have positive results. Secondly, policy is about authority. It's about legal and regulatory power. Are we an agent that, or in the work that we're doing, are we working within existing legislation? Are we advising the legislation needs to be changed? Are we working on regulations under existing law? These are all authority tools. And then, of course, treasure. We come a day after the federal budget, how we raise money, how we spend money. That's a very, very important element of what it is public policy can do. And then organisation, bureaucratic organisation, thinking about whether or not we have people with the right skills in the right jobs in the right institutions. My aim is to provoke. There's just one way to think about these 4 tools of government and public policy. Next slide. I could have picked any academic working in the area of public policy. I like Bardak's work. I like Bardak's work because it gives us a way of thinking about the work that we are doing. I think there are very few examples of where good policy results from 8 being considered first. 1 to 8 does not need to take a year, 6 months. It can take a week. It could take a day if you need to respond really quickly. But if you are solely guided by the need to get something up on Instagram or something out there in the public domain, or an event whereby the minister or whoever else can be seen to be doing things, we are focusing on the packaging of the Christmas present before thinking about what it is we want to give our husband, our wife, or our kids. Good wrapping is really important because it creates a glow of anticipation and people get interested. But ultimately, if it is a hairdryer for your partner, he may already have a hairdryer, right? So I'm not going to stretch that metaphor in relation to all the other gifts, but define the problem. There are many problems in society that are not amenable to policy. Define the problem that this policy is looking to address. Assemble key evidence in relation to the problem. That can be data, it can be stories as well. Both are forms of evidence, both can be highly compelling. There are always alternatives in relation to policy decisions. One clear alternative is we do nothing, but purely binary advice is unlikely to be really, really rigorously thought through. But what are the alternatives in terms of how this might be addressed? What is the criteria that we use in order to make that judgment? If a decision is taken, what are the likely implications of that decision? What are the outcomes? Number 5, what are the trade-offs? there is a school of thought which says the only truly effective and meaningful new policy must involve trade-offs, and that is a just measure of pain over certain activities, groups, and people if one is going to favour others. Then decide. I'm not going to go into the nature of effective executive decision making, but there's a beautiful literature on that as well. But we decide, and only once that is the case do we think about what the story is. If we step away and we think about the roles that we may have in the public system, when we go from 1 to 8, I ask you the question, whose job is this? Whose job is this? Might it be yours? And who is better placed to consider effective policy development in a more rigorous way? Next slide. I was speaking to a colleague in the public service the other day, and we were talking about public policy as is wont. And I was just reminded of this, I think, very, very rich book, which is by Suzanne Hayward in collaboration with Jeremy Hayward. Jeremy Hayward was a very eminent former cabinet secretary in the UK who I worked with very briefly. Friends of mine worked far more closely with Jeremy. There are a lot of really, really beautiful insights there in terms of how we think about the role of an effective public service. The shorthand way to say it is frank and fearless advice. It is far more than simply frank and fearless advice. But I can, maybe through Louisa, send a link to a review that I wrote of this book, and maybe it will elaborate and give you a further sense of quite how I see the absolutely vital and important work that everybody in this session does. And apologies for having talked for too long, but we've got 32 minutes to challenge this talking head with a tie. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. We're going to start with some questions from the audience, and if you're in our group today, very welcome to you. And if you haven't participated in one of these Q&A or discussive formats before, it's a good idea just to write your initial thoughts down in the chat so we can get a sense of your question, and then I'll try and coordinate so that there is the visage of order in the conversation. So Nicola's already joined in that, and we're looking for more questions. So please put your thinking caps on and do that. I thought I would start with a question. Nick, I started in the New South Wales government it was 1999, so very much remember that. I think it's Elizabeth Street full of the at.
Oh, you're buffering, Louisa.
On that time, it's often considered a bit of a golden age of public policy in New Zealand.
I didn't get that either.
Hey, Louisa, you're buffering terribly. Either that or you've suddenly got a speech impediment. I'm not sure which.
In that case, we will turn to Nicola for her question.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Nick, for your presentation. I work at the Department of Education in the Centre for Education Statistics and Evaluation, doing qualitative research, but have a background in more sort of policy development, particularly federally in social services, which was an interesting time when I was working there, actually, because that was when robo-debt was all fermenting, I suppose. On the back, especially of last night's budget, I feel like I haven't done a lot of reading into the analysis or into the details of the budget. But it feels to me like there's been some hard decisions that government has made with that that feel a little bit more than performative politics. I think it is still a lot of politics at play, obviously, but I'm curious, given your comment about, yeah, a lot of the kind of cabaret and rhetoric and game playing that we observe. What are your thoughts on what we can be doing as public servants to better support more substantial policy debate and action?
Thanks very much, Nicola. That's a question. I'll try and do it justice in the short amount of time that I've got. I think that I'm talking about probably senior public servants, but I think it's true for anybody who wants to pursue a career longer term in the public service, is there is nothing wrong with being political. Indeed, I think that the very best public servants, and I think I would say Jeremy Hayward is one of them. I can go through a list of public servants who I've worked with here in New South Wales also, but won't, is that they need to understand the political dynamics behind policy. What is actually driving and motivating a politician? And that can be it can be achieved in a number of different ways. I think it's very important as public servants to not only listen, but hear what it is the executive is saying. Hear that. And in terms of crafting one's advice in terms of what might be done, a compelling case can be made around, I'm sorry, I can't remember the Minister for Education in New South Wales. Who is that, Nicola?
That's Prue Carr.
Okay, well, if we go back to what Prue Carr may have said about her major priorities in terms of education, right? You can also find out what Murat said as well. I'm sure people are well aware, or maybe only people in the Department of Education are aware of the wonderful Australian story about Murat and his career as a committed educator and public servant. But to understand and be prepared to tailor one's advice around what it is executive leaders and decision makers have actually said. Minister Carr, when you said last March, we heard you. That's why I think that this proposal that we're putting up in terms of how we better measure, monitor, and through that measuring and monitoring, reform early childhood education is something you will be really, really engaged with, right? I've heard you is actually quite a good way. And that's also a really good thing to do in a liberal democracy, right? These people have been elected, right? And it's a really, really difficult job to be a frontline politician, whether at state or at federal level. So to be party political, I would counsel very much against that. But to understand the context in which your policy work plays into the political, I think is a core skill of an effective senior public servant. It's a little less true but as you pursue your career and hopefully get into a more senior role, political is not a pejorative. I was fortunate enough to work in the policy directorate for 2 years at Downing Street. In that role, I was working with some people who were there as a result of political patronage and some people who were there who were career public servants. I still know, and they're friends and former colleagues of mine who are still working within Whitehall. And they were some of the most political people who would say, I know that this person thinks that this is an extraordinarily wise political thing to do, but I can tell you from our experience of having worked in a similar area for 10 years, the risks are this. If you want to think about the opportunities, they're not just what you perceive, but from our experience, and that all comes from career public servants who understand and can respond to the political dynamic. That is very, very different to minister says, minister gets, we do, command and control public service, which in my view is, well, it's a number of things. I could use a number of adjectives, but one of them is simply dangerous. But Nicola, if you want to carry on the conversation through Louisa or whatever else, I'm really happy to have a chat.
Thank you so much. Thanks,
Okay.
that's really helpful.
Thank you. And our next question, which continues a theme of how we best support good policy making. Rebecca, would you like to come on and ask your question?
Thanks, Louisa, and thanks very much, Nicholas. In COVID and now today, we're facing very uncertain times, which puts pressure on policy development to be rapid, yet trying to be robust as well. So just interested in your advice on how do we follow those steps that you outlined on one of your slides of, considering options, alternatives, when you might only have 2 days to do it and get it up to Cabinet?
That's a really good question, Rebecca. I would say when looking at any of those 8 steps or thinking about what one is being asked to do within a bureaucratic hierarchy, the first, or if not the first, the second question that you want to be asking is how much time do we have? Because it is time that actually allows better quality advice and the ability to actually interrogate each of these disciplines and steps. They can be very practical disciplines and steps with words written, shared with colleagues, etc. Or they can simply be what goes on between your ears and your head in thinking about how can we best deliver on this. But time is a really important factor. And to be sent an email at 5:30 the evening before, having to deliver something at a meeting at 10 a.m. the next, that is best avoided. It's just, you are very unlikely to be in a position to provide adequate and professional and rigorous advice within those constraints. So I don't think we can slow down the speed and possibly the superficiality of much of what passes for political communication. I actually think media management and political communication are very different things, but that's a completely separate question. Yeah. All I'd say is I don't think we're going to slow that down, but the question of, how much time do we have is a really important question. And the more time you have, the better your advice is likely to be.
Thank you.
I would also probably add to that the timing of the advice is critical to make sure that, as you mentioned earlier, Nick, being aware of, what is in consideration, what are the types of options the government might be considering and what might be plausible and achievable for the government of the day is also a good thing to bear in mind. But we have Rebecca here as well.
So Louisa, I totally agree with you, and I hope it. I'm sort of big noting myself, but I do remember that the first advice that I ever put into the red box at Downing Street had a whole series of proposals in relation to what the government and the Prime Minister could do in relation to reducing the risks of climate change and promoting sustainability, right? I was really proud of that advice. It was the first time I put something in the red box, and it was really nice, and it came back within a day, and it had no, cross, never, not, don't understand what, and I thought, oh, okay, well, righto, that's clear. And the chief of staff at the time was a fellow called Jonathan Powell, and Jonathan called me and said, Nick, I know that's your first advice, and Tony's very, very rarely like that, but I'm not saying that was bad advice. That was really, really, really good advice, yeah, but he just doesn't want to do that, and that's okay, yeah. And I said, look, don't worry, Jonathan, I know I'm not the executive here, he is. My job is to advise. By the time I left Downing Street after 2 years, of the 5 key pieces of advice that I put up, 3 of them had actually been pursued and decided on, right? So absolutely, timing is super important. And there are elements of that timing that you simply can't be aware of.
Yes, definitely. And conversations that are going on that you can't be aware of that
Yep.
are, you know, influential.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have Helen next, who will also be continuing this theme of the skills we need. Helen.
Yes, hello, Nick. Thanks very much for talking to us today. My question, you've already answered part of this question, in fact, in addressing the need for political awareness. But my question is, among all the people you've known who you would describe as really top performers in this field, can you pick out common characteristics?
Yes, I can, Helen. Where do you work other than
Sorry,
in the snowfields or in a cloud?
I'm with the EPA. Yes, otherwise
with the EPA?
On a cloudy hillside, yes.
Oh, yeah, that's nice. I can. I've developed a whole one-day course on the attributes of effective climate policy professionals, actually. And there are kind of key attributes that I think are really key to effective public servants. And I think that they're true whether one is working in Blacktown for the Department of Community Services or whether one is working in the Cabinet Office in New South Wales or federally or in the UK or in other jurisdictions. I think there's actually a really very beautiful quote, and it will have me shuffling around to give it to you directly. But it's a quote from someone called Sir Robin Ibbs, who used to work for the Central Policy Review staff. And he clearly identifies what are the key attributes of effective senior officials. And this is someone who worked in the UK for all sides of politics. I'm afraid that everybody online is now going to have to look at the top of my head as I go and just try and find a quote, because I know it well enough to paraphrase it, but it won't be right. Whereas it will be if I can find it. So just bear with me for 1 second, Helen, and everybody else. Take a good stretch, stand up, I don't know, whatever you need to do, but it'll take me just 30 seconds. Just bear with me.
Well, you can also let us know later as well.
I can. Well, should we do that? That's here we are. And I'll share this too. But Helen, super good question, right? I used to have this pinned up on my pin board in 3 different jobs that I had. It's so sad that when we do this Brady Bunch show, you know, all the faces in the boxes, we don't have things like pin boards where I can just pin it up and go, you know what, guys, that's kind of important. But anyway, a temperament which will put up with a fluctuating workload and a very fluctuating success rate. Not being liable to succumb to depression in the face of constant rejection of one's advice. Nor developing that cynicism about the imperfectibility of the world which characterizes so many perfectly intelligent officials. I can send you the quote, but that's one element, I think, of what makes for a really effective policy professional.
Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Yes. Avoided, I think, for us to maintain that curiosity rather than become cynical. So Amelia, I think, is next. Amelia, hopefully you can turn your camera on.
Yes, it should be on.
Yes, great.
Hi, Nick. It's been a long time since I was in your class at Sydney Uni, about
gosh.
8 or 9 years.
Amelia. Oh dear. How nice to see you.
Good to see you too. I now work at...
That's what I was going to ask. Where are you working now?
I'm at DQ. I'm in the Strategic Policy and Cabinet branch, so very relevant to this sort of thing.
Okay,
yes.
Cool. Well, nice, lovely to see you.
Yes. I'd really appreciate your thoughts on what the role of public servants and policy practitioners would be or should be in sort of the increasing situations we're seeing where certain stakeholders, and you can probably guess that I'm trying to be a bit diplomatic here, disagree with some of the fundamental definitions of problems, even when they're really, really evidence-based. You can probably tell I've been watching a bit of budget estimates lately. But I think the issue is a bit broader than that. There's a lot of misinformation to wade through, and it seems to be hitting people that it wouldn't necessarily have been coming from in the past, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Do you want to be a little bit more specific, Amelia, for the audience? Because it's slightly euphemistic.
Okay, having, outright climate change science deniers in Parliament, and sort of having to operate, as apolitical public servants as we do, in a reality where there are people who are, denying things that we as a department would just view as sort of fundamental truths of our work.
It's a really good question, and I think all I'd say there, and this is one of the reasons that I'm really pleased to be in my other role, which is as the chair of the Net Zero Commission, is I've been around long enough to know when there was a handful of people who were working on climate change in the New South Wales government, and I was one of them. And there were no members of the New South Wales cabinet other than the Premier who thought this was an issue that should be pursued by the state government. Not because they didn't believe in the basic science, but they actually thought, well, it's to do with Kyoto and it's an international and national issue, and it's not, it's Bob Carr's indulgence. My view is that if you really kind of step away and get on the balcony, if you want to, I don't know if we ever went through adaptive leadership, Amelia, but if you want to get up on the balcony and look down and you sort of say, well, where are the decisions in policy terms that are most consequential in terms of reducing climate risk in this part of the world? I think that there's a very, very strong case to be made that that's actually at a state government level for a whole variety of reasons because of, well, anyway, that's for a seminar. But I think all I'd say is that why, and what I was going to say is that when we look at the Net Zero Commission is that why are we doing what we're doing? The law is a very good reason, okay? So climate policy is never going to achieve certainty. Anybody who asks for that in a liberal democracy, there's no certainty in health policy, transport policy, economic policy, right? There just isn't. So why have it in climate policy? But we do need a measure of stability and continuity, and law helps embed that. And yes, there are real challenges in relation to political economy and people who deny the science because of self-interest, and often that is economic self-interest. And we need to understand that power dynamic. But equally, we can return to legislation, which really essentially mandates legal targets for 2030, 2035, and the longer term 2050 net zero target, which is far, far more debatable than the things that need to happen by 2030 and 2035. So why are we doing these things? The law is a pretty good reason to do those things. Okay, so we should remember that context. And I'm not saying don't kind of understand the crudity of some of the politics that still remains, but that law was passed through the New South Wales Parliament with almost no debate and not going to a vote in the lower house. That is important. I'll drop you a line as well, Amelia. It would be nice to catch up. I'm sure sometime we're in similar offices.
Thank you, yes.
So we have a question, Shazadi, I think, hopefully I've pronounced your name correctly, building off this idea that, and particularly, I guess, Shazadi, would you like to come on and ask your question about how we identify emerging issues and what they might be?
Thanks, Lisa. And thank you, Nick, for joining us and sharing your experience. I'm new to policy, public policy, I would say. I lead innovation for the State Insurance Regulatory Authority, CIRA, in New South Wales. I don't directly work in policy making, but I set the guardrails for new innovations that we might fund. So I do work very closely with policymakers. One of the questions that came to mind, just going through your presentation, was just from your experience and your valuable insights over the years that you've acquired, what do you believe in this rapidly evolving landscape and the complex challenges that we face as policymakers today would be the most significant in shaping the future of public policy? And how do you see these practitioners adapting their approaches to address these new dynamics effectively? So, for example, I've just listed a few challenges which I see. The most obvious one is the fast-paced technological advancements. Then we've got managing competing stakeholder interests, which I think is not new, but it does happen. Ensuring regulatory compliance in an increasingly globalized world, addressing data and privacy concerns, and then striving for equitable solutions that consider diverse populations. And I'm sure there's a lot more challenges that we face. These are just some that come up in my role on a day-to-day basis. And I'm just wondering which ones or which one significantly you think would be one that shapes public policy in the future, and how we should be adapting our approaches to address these dynamics.
Excellent
Okay,
question.
thanks. It's a very good question, Shazadi, and I'm just looking down at my watch here, and I'm not sure if I can really do it justice, but I'll give it a go. And it's interesting that you share the same apartment as a colleague of mine at ANU, because looking at your background, you seem to be in exactly the same whiz-bang, nice interior that my colleague at ANU always uses as the background. It looks really nice. You said we work through a rapidly evolving landscape. I think that is true at one level, but just be very careful with thinking that all of that is very particular to now. It's, I'm reminded of something that a colleague of mine used to say years ago. I won't name drop as to who, but change is a constant. The thing that is new is the speed and global nature of technological, environmental, given if we think about risks associated with global climate change, the technological, environmental and social changes that are now upon us. It is the speed and rapidity of that change. So even if we think about technology, 5 years ago, the conversation that you and I would be having would not be on the basis of having access to numerous, very, very potent AI platforms on the phone that can answer questions for us so rapidly. Yeah. I would argue that although that is enormously potent, we must always have the human and the professional at the center of that. Is that AI can actually aid the most important thing, which is critical thinking and the ability to analyze the information that is presented to you. I won't go into a broader conversation about AI and tech because I'm not an expert in it, but all I'd say is it is utterly transformative in terms of how we think about the work that we do. And when I say we, I mean almost anyone. When we talk about the future of public policy, again, I think we need to retain a confidence in the value of both public policy and the public service, and our role as public servants, as the people who help deliver the amenity. I would imagine that the context in which you operate is highly professionalized. You're a young public servant, you're looking at the screen a lot, you're manipulating information, you're working with colleagues, sometimes you meet them in the office, sometimes you see them on the screen. That is completely different to the position that you would find as a public servant working in a hospital, where you are dealing with human care for other human beings. That is almost unaffected in relation to the direct support and relationship by technology. I'm rambling a little bit, but hopefully that sort of gives you a sense of my reply, but I'm very happy to have a further conversation offline.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And we have probably time for one more question, I think. We are going to ask you a climate change question. So Brendan, I think you were the first one to put up your hand on that topic. So we'll turn to you.
Thank you, Nick. Brendan George. I'm actually with Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. I'm out here in Tamworth. And I guess, so I just want to say, noting you mentioned Sir Nicholas and his tome from 2007, and he specifically identified that climate change is one of the world's greatest market failures. My question is, what do you see as, call it, the next small steps in relation to having a more market-based response in New South Wales, not globally, but what can we do in New South Wales to try and look at how we are responding and what we're doing in relation to climate change? And I just add really quickly, it's a really big thing in the regional areas. It's going to become more and more important.
In what sense, Brendan? I mean, I totally, it just gets back to possibly point one, is identify the problem. When you say it's a really big issue, you could be talking about transmission infrastructure, or you could be talking about 2.5 degrees of warming if you're a farmer. So I'm not sure.
Yes, I think it's probably more the latter. Let's park the transmission component. That is very significant in itself. But in terms of production and impacts on agriculture, impacts on forestry, impacts on our natural resources, I think it'll be a significant issue. And we've been saying this for some decades. But what do you see as some next steps in terms of our market-based response? And why I say market-based is we think that can give us scale. That's really what we're after, is a scale-based response.
Oh, well, the easy question was last. Brendan, look, I'll just say a few things that will hopefully be useful. Firstly, I'm very happy to share with you Nick Stern's latest work, which only came out about 3 months ago, which is updating the review. There's always more to read. Don't bother. Just read the exec summary. It'll give you the argument. The title is The Growth Story of the 21st Century. Yeah. If there is a more compelling growth story for any economy in the world that does not involve emissions reduction and greater efficiency within the economy, I want to hear that story. Yeah. So it's incumbent upon others who do not find the low carbon, trying to drive towards net zero economic story compelling. What is the other one? What is the other one? So I just make that point. You talk about the importance of markets. I'm with Nick Stern on that. Necessary but not adequate. If I go back to Christopher Hood's slide, absolutely we can use money, market-based mechanisms, but I think we have to be very careful about believing that all the other elements of effective climate policy are merely tokenistic. It's only when we get to a carbon price, either nationally or in New South Wales, that we're going to actually create the emissions reductions required. I think that possibly had far more saliency back in 2007 than it does now. And that's because we simply have so much more technology available. That's just one reason, but so much more technology available that can help us achieve measurable, reportable and verifiable emissions reduction. So I also think that, getting back to what I was saying about understanding the politics, and if we look at the work of Ross Garnaut still, Rod Sims and others, they're still absolutely arguing for the critical importance of a carbon price. I'm with them in principle, but I think and now really isn't the forum to really think through what is the opportunity and how can one get a political decision to impose a cost on an economy for an uncertain future benefit. The politics of that is extraordinarily hard. Imposing a cost for an identified future benefit, that's hard. But the challenge for any economy seeking to put in place a carbon price is that you're imposing the price and the cost, but you can't guarantee that that actually has the direct effect. But that gets down to the whole way in which we think about the climate problem, complex, multidisciplinary, collective action problem under uncertainty, etc. Yeah. But Brendan, super good question. I think it's actually the right question to be asking now, given what we now know about risk, which is something we didn't know through the CPRS and other things. But I certainly don't want to be verballed as chair of Net Zero Commission says carbon price. So I'm happy to have a chat with you offline, Brendan.
Thank you very
you.
much, Brendan, for leaving the difficult questions to the end. That was probably my fault as well, but thank you very much, Nick, for sharing your knowledge today. And I know you probably didn't get around to it, but I know you did acknowledge the Gul Izmir's role in policy development, who was I first worked with in developing my very first cabinet submission, and she very firmly told me I had no idea what I was doing. So thankfully 25 years later I have got a little bit better, but I want to thank you again, Nick, for your time today and in preparing for this session. And also I wanted to thank our audience for your interest and enthusiasm for discussing policy and debating policy ideas. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.